I'm going to let the wonderful Emma and Susan intro themselves to you, and then we'll crack on with the session. So over to you, Emma.
Great, so welcome everyone. I'm Emma. I'm a PhD researcher in the School of Education at Durham, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about my research into commuter students. But prior to that, I did work in the sector. I was a widening participation officer with a remit to supporting commuter students. So I'm hoping from my presentation today be a mixture of things I've learned from my research and kind of practical tips and tricks for supporting commuter students at your institution. I'll let Susan go next.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm Susan Preston. I'm currently an Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Project Officer based in the Faculty of Arts, Humanities and Cultures at the University of Leeds. But I was a student, a commuter student at the University of Leeds. I started my course in 2017 and essentially commuted until the pandemic came. And then I did a year in industry at the University of Leeds. So I finished and graduated in 2021. So yeah, back to you, Emma.
Great, so we'll make a start. I'll share my screen and I'm hoping, yeah, that's the right one. So I'm just going to put a timer to make sure I'm keeping to time. So yeah, as I've said, this is based on my ESRC funded research into commuter students, but I have experience of working in the sector as well. With a remit to supporting commuters. So first of all, I want to try and get a sense of the room today. So what I'd like you to do is using the chat box, I'd like you to tell me rating on a scale of 1 to 5, how much support is available, financial or otherwise, for commuter students at your institution. 1 I've put as nothing at all, and 5 is 3 or more commuter exclusive initiatives. So 2 or 3 might be that there's a couple of initiatives, maybe not commuter exclusive, that commuters might use at your institution. 3 or 4 might be that there's 1, maybe 2 commuter exclusive ones. This is not a test. I'm just really interested to see the room today. If you're not sure, that's also absolutely fine. Just write don't know or DK for sure. Oh, there's a lot of 2s. That's interesting. Wow, okay, I haven't seen a 4 or a 5 yet, which I think is particularly interesting. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. If you're still typing, please feel free to carry on. That's really interesting then. So as we can see, and hopefully you can too, you've got a whole group of people that are interested enough to come to an hour webinar on commuter students, and we're generally from institutions where actually there's nothing at all for commuters currently, or that there's a couple of bits that might be maybe not commuter student specific. And I think that's really interesting because it also shows that the sector is, we're having these increased conversations about commuter students, but actually in terms of what is available for commuter students, like practically speaking, potentially, if we're going to take this as an example, not very much. So it just shows the importance of kind of the researcher and that we're having these conversations. The next few slides I'm going to go through incredibly briefly, and I'm really happy to pick up any information on here in the questions at the end of the session. But just to give you a bit of context, whilst there has been some great stuff on commuter students in the past by people like Liz Thomas, generally looking at commuter student experiences is still quite an under-researched area. What we do know is that commuter students are more likely to have poorer academic outcomes and poorer career progression than people who live in student accommodation. In terms of statistics, the Home and Away Sutton Trust report is the stat that gets bandied around the most in regards to there being around a quarter of undergraduate students that commute to university. And in my kind of research, I am only focused on undergraduate. I completely acknowledge that the commuter students are also postgraduate students and part-time and distance, but this is what I'm kind of going to be focusing on today. But with the Donnelly and Gamsey report, you know, that didn't include mature students in the stats. They didn't, so it's likely going to be much higher. And obviously 2018 is pre-COVID and pre-cost of living crisis. So I think actually the statistics would probably be quite higher than that now. And generally, commuting to university is still not considered the UK norm for undergraduate students. And I think this is a really important caveat, though. It really depends on institutional context, because you might be sat here thinking, well, actually, Emma, we've got 70% of commuter students at our institution. I'm talking more as a sector, but I totally acknowledge that this is very dependent on each institution. And it's something that I'm going to be picking up on throughout the rest of my talk today. When I'm talking about commuter students, there's lots of different terminology used in the sector. There's lots of different measurements used in the sector. That's because there's no sector agreed definition on what we kind of call commuter students, let alone how we define them. My definition is based on accommodation mode, and again, really happy to pick this up in the questions. So specifically, what type of accommodation they live on a campus, and but there's just generally no agreement at the moment. And again, might be very specific to your institution, because if we're thinking about, you know, my research is in the northeastern Yorkshire context. What a commuter student might be kind of thought of there will be quite different, for example, in a London context. So that's something that, again, we can't quite agree on as a sector just yet. If we're looking at the literature, commuting is considered to impact the entire student experience. There's literature thinking about the reasons why people commute. Often they're quite varied. The physical commute itself, anyone that's ever commuted on public transport will probably, identify with some of these experiences, let alone if you're a student. Although I think the interesting point here is that often the experiences are unexpected. When people get on campus, if they're people who drive, they might have issues with things like parking, lack places to store their belongings. And I know Susan might pick up on this a little bit later. In terms of the kind of experience, once they've got to university, what next? They can have difficulties with things like timetabling. Timetabling is like one of the biggest issues that commuter students seem to face, in that often it's not very intuitive, although I do appreciate that some institutions are doing some really cool stuff around like 2 and 3 day a week timetables to try and condense it down for part-time work. But in this case it would help commuter students. Extracurricular activities and social activities, these are things that commuter students in the literature are said to not take part in. I think this is something I'm going to revisit with, but generally it's portrayed that they don't take part in these things for issues to do with their commute specifically. So things like travel time and the cost it would take, the expense of getting there, but also the actual activities themselves, things like unsociable timing, but there's nothing there for them. So in the case here, I'd be interested to see if anyone here in their institution puts something on for commute students during induction week, for example. So it's a kind of a mixture of a couple of things. It would be remiss of me to not mention finance, given I'm with Blackbullion today, and some other financial considerations that that within the literature kind of has been, and partly within my research generally has come out. So first of all, travel costs. Absolutely no surprise that the cost of travel can be, there's an expense there. It can vary, and also can vary based on the transport that people take. Car parking permits, even if they're university owned, aren't always the cheapest. Same with the public transport costs. Everything adds up. Travel costs, though, are heavily dependent on the type of transport you take, the region you're traveling in, and the institution of study. So depending on like whether local councils have agreements in place, travel in agreements. So I know Leeds, for example, has certain agreements with certain bus companies, for example. Same with Durham, we have an agreement with certain bus companies, so it's cheaper travel. But if you're commuting from outside of Durham, you're not going to be able to get that. For example, there's hidden costs that I think everyone. I don't think I've told you anything new that commuter students experience have travel costs, but hidden costs, there's things that people don't necessarily realise that commuter students end up having to pay for. So one of my staff participants was telling me that commuter students at their institution had to get hotels the night before their exams because they were A, worried about getting there on time to their exam, B, transport strikes meant that they couldn't physically get there and there was really no other way of them getting to their exam. There's other things that aren't necessarily commuter specific, like if you forget your lunch, having to buy food on campus. But the difference is if you forget your lunch and you live 15 minutes away, you're a bit annoyed, but you'll just have to walk back. If you forget your lunch and you live 2 hours away, quite different. All these things just really add up. Another one of my participants, during the transport strikes, they talked about how when they got their train, the trains got cancelled. The next eligible train for their ticket was 2 hours away, and they just wanted to get home, so they bought a new train ticket. So these are the things that slowly add up. And lastly, linking to underrepresented groups, commuter students can often, but not always, fall into other widening participation groups, and that can also link to other financial reasons why a student might be commuting and the other financial experiences related to that. So thinking then, some initial key questions for you to start asking yourselves and of your institution. First of all, do you have a definition within your institution for commuter students? If you do, it'd be great to start with familiarising yourself on it. If you don't think it's very good, then you can maybe start to think about and asking questions of the people that created it. If you're not sure and you don't really know who's responsible for this, a good place to start is trying to find the person who deals with the HEIs data, because for the Higher Education Statistics Agency, they have to record the accommodation type of all of their students for their statistics. So it's a good place to start, somewhere like strategy and planning. Secondly, is there a working group currently set up at your institution in supporting commuter students? I can imagine a lot of people, given the numbers given earlier, would probably say no. So is there a group of people that might be interested in having a discussion about commuter students, perhaps accommodation, the library, etc.? And is it something that might be able to be organically set up? And thirdly, and I think this is very important, if you're really thinking about commuter students at your institution and their experiences, has anyone actually asked them? Has anyone actually put out a survey or, gone around and asked people, what are your experiences, financial or otherwise? I think those are some kind of key starting points. Other things I want to bring up today and stuff that's really come out of my research so far is that a lot of what I said before regarding what is available literature-wise and research that has already been done is that it portrays commuting as a negative experience. And I think actually that's not the case always. So for example, a lot of my participants in my study talked about commuting as their preferred choice, i.e. they weren't going to be, there was no way that they were going to be living in student accommodation. That was for a variety of reasons. I mean, I started my PhD at the age of 27 with a partner living in my own rented house. So why on earth would have I gone into student accommodation? It's the same idea. Secondly, the idea that commuter students don't get involved in extracurricular activities is just not true. About half of my participants took part in extracurricular activities. They were academic reps and student ambassadors, and they took part in sports and societies. Now, obviously, the other half didn't, and the reasons for the reason why they didn't, I've kind of brushed about on earlier. There's also, some people might decide to take part in their first year and then choose to focus on their studies in their second and third year. Equally, students might want to get settled at uni first and get their commute sort of settled in and then take part. So, just because a snapshot is probably not an accurate portrayal of commuter students and their experiences. And lastly, support should be thinking about instead what they're lacking. I think this idea of commuter being a negative experience is often end up framing in what they're lacking and that it's this lesser experience. Instead, I think we need to really reframe this and think about how our institutions can develop things that are more inclusive to this student group. And again, I know that Susan's going to be talking about this in their presentation and their work that they did as a commuter student in setting up certain societies. But something like a society, finding out, why people are taking part so far in sports and societies like commuter students, what makes it attractive to them. And then if there's people that aren't taking part, is it to do with unsociable timing? Is it something that can be remedied that way by having this partnership with the student union, for example? Then the next thing is generally that a one-size-fits-all approach is unlikely to work. So I hate to break it to you, but if you go away and set something in motion, that's brilliant, but it's still probably not going to improve everyone's experiences, all commuter students. And that's because commuter students are not a homogenous group. I've been talking about them as if they are, but one of the main findings from my research is the pure difference and almost sometimes contradictory experiences of commuter students, even within the same institution, because as a student group, they're not the same. They come from diverse backgrounds. So for example, I had 3 mature students all at one institution and actually of similar ages. Their experiences were so different about how they experienced campus. So a couple of them, they were very sociable with each other. They met course friends. They went to loads of cafes and institutional spaces. And then another person I was stood outside in the rain with because they didn't feel comfortable sitting in the cafe. They felt really isolated, and they said that they had no friends at their institution. So just to kind of demonstrate, that's just 3 mature students at the same institution. On paper, you could argue have the same experience when actually they don't. So that kind of leads me on to the idea that there's differences within institutions. People travel in different ways, so they will have different experiences. Someone who's traveling via train 2 hours away on a very precarious train line will have quite a big difference to someone driving, for example. They experience other issues. And then lastly, differences within participants' individual experiences. So things like train delays, university strikes, weather, these can all impact a single person's commute. Again, anyone that's ever taken public transport in the UK will know that one day you can have a train journey that is delightful and you have time to get a coffee on the way to work. And another time, it can literally be the worst journey. You're next to someone's face like this, and you're having to kind of force your way in, and it's hot and it's delayed and all of these things. So again, having policies and support that kind of enables us to recognize this difference, I think, is really important. That being said, I'm going to end on this slide just now, in that I've talked a lot about kind of the reasoning about it, but I appreciate you're here for probably some practical tips and tricks. So I've kind of put together, based on my research, I put together this kind of like starting point. Feel free to take a photo of this. And like I said, I'm happy, like I'm going to share my slides afterwards. All I ask is that you credit me if you use it. But it's hopefully a way that you can think about quick wins and time intensive related to low cost and high cost, because in the sector, we don't always have a lot of money. We don't always have a lot of time, and you're potentially the only one from your institution here today, and you're only one person. So I appreciate these things. You might have to kind of figure out where you sit and what you can start off with. So some of it fits quite neatly. So for example, I'd urge people to go away at the end of this session and Google commuter students in your university search engine, because I think a lot of you might be surprised at the lack of web pages, for example, on there. And whilst you might have to grapple with IT teams, having just a website that maybe has just a list of links to other bits of the website, so not necessarily creating anything new, might be a really quick win, an easy way to get started. Obviously, you've got other things that get further along, so to more time intensive and higher cost. So things like commuter student accommodation and bursaries. Again, might be a case of just repurposing or kind of changing the descriptions of the bursaries so that commuter students know that they can apply for certain things. And there's other things that exist outside the matrix. So things like creating a commuter student survey that can be as time intensive or kind of a quick win as much as you want to make it. Same with joining a working group is very different to establishing one. But I appreciate I'm just slightly over time, so I'm going to pause it there. Feel free to follow me on X or send me an email after the session. I'm really happy to kind of keep these conversations going and have a conversation with people afterwards. And again, we've got the Q&A afterwards, but I'm going to stop there and let Susan take over. So thanks very much for listening.
Thank you so much. So yeah, I've already introduced myself, but the presentation I don't think I introduced because I forgot. But I'm going to talk about commuter student-led initiatives at the University of Leeds. So I basically founded the Commuter Society. I'm going to talk about the process of that, what the society does, and also we campaigned for a lounge or a space for commuter students. So now there's somewhere on campus, which is literally designated for the commuters, which is just amazing. Yeah, if you're interested, I studied BA Geography, and I think that's pretty much everything on that side. So a little bit of the sort of my story, I guess. So I come from a small town called Brighouse in West Yorkshire, and the trains were hourly to Leeds, and they kind of looked like this. So they were these really unpleasant pacer trains, and they were often two carriages in the peak time, which obviously meant people couldn't get on then further down the line. So in total, in terms of walking to the station, getting on a train and getting all the way up to the campus, we're looking at probably 1 hour 15 each way. So we're looking at probably 2.5 hours total per day. And I was going in 5 days a week. Once on board, this, if anyone's not been on a pacer train before, because they don't really have them in the UK now because they're not accessible, so they got rid of them. But this is what it looks like inside there on the bottom right. So extremely unpleasant, basically a bus on rails. And I used to sit in the bike rack because there were no seats, or it was just like 3 in a row, or just awful experience. So in terms of like socializing, the last train back was just after 9:15. So most societies like the Geography Society wouldn't even go out probably till 11 o'clock or midnight. So absolutely no way really I could participate in the Geography Society, for example. I think that's basically most of my experience in a nutshell. I could talk about this for quite a long time. So I reflected on what can higher education institutions do to improve the commuter student experience. And these are the kind of areas that I thought would really help. And this is kind of how I approached it. So firstly, it was kind of having a network or a society so commuter students could talk to each other, share their experience. From that, it flowed kind of the awareness piece, so sort of making more senior staff aware of the challenges, raising awareness in the university that commuter students exist, because I put in a freedom of information request to the university because I did my dissertation on this, and 1,500 students out of roughly say 30,000 taught students were commuters, so that was about 6%. So at Leeds, because it's the Russell Group University as well, there's usually less commuter students there compared to post-92 universities. So from that, also this network then provides information, which I'll come on to talk about, and then the space being the lounge. So in terms of founding the society, yeah, basically we had to put together a business case to our student union, and we needed 25 signatures, which was a real challenge, you know, to try and find 25 commuter students when you're a second year university student and you don't know anyone. There was one commuter student out of 150 on my course. So I basically asked friends on the course, please support this. So they supported that. So we then got the go-ahead in February 2019. And since then, at the moment, they're charging £2 for membership, which gives you discounts at the events, and it also helps run the society in terms of marketing. So there's various events, which I'll come on to in a minute. Part of the society as well was around the advocacy work, in terms of we passed a policy, so the student union would be more inclusive towards commuter students. So think about when they were holding the events, where they were holding the events, and just raised awareness to the kind of barriers to participation, like financial barriers as well, that we were experiencing. The society provides practical information. They've produced an amazing guidebook, so that's got a ton of information, which I'll come on to in a minute. But even like real-time information on the WhatsApp chat, they'll be like, there's been a landslip, or there's trees down on the line. It's like just really useful. I'll come on to the bit about the Common Lounge soon. And yeah, the social media, there's several social media groups, and they are highly active, which is just fantastic to see. So just a variety of some of the events we've held. So the top left is Leeds Light Night. So that was last year. Group of students walked around Leeds City Centre and saw the illuminations, basically. We've had escape rooms, crazy golf. Some of the pictures on there are from a birthday party that we ran, and then like just meals out and things like that. So it's a really nice group to be part of. So all this, I should say, is obviously commuter student led. So in terms of having a space on campus and having a space for belonging, we identified the need for a commuters lounge, because we were basically stuck on campus. You know, if it takes me an hour and a half to basically get home, then I can't get home and back in a free period, even if I have a massive like 3-hour period. So I'm stuck on campus all day. There were so many spaces of consumption on campus. So if you went to a cafe, you'd feel like you needed to buy a coffee to be in that space and belong in that space. So that was kind of partly why we wanted this commuters lounge, to kind of combat the feeling of needing to buy stuff and making it cheaper as well. And the social capital through encounter. So residential students are often making friends at society events that they can access, or in the halls of residence. And for commuter students, that really doesn't exist. It can be quite a lonely experience. So having the lounge means that students can sort of bump into each other and interact and make new friends that way. And also it was a familiar space for many people, you know, if they've come from the sixth form, you know, that common lounge experience, it's familiar. So that's also a great aspect to it. In terms of how this was set up, we have a student ideas fund at the University of Leeds. And basically any student can put forward an idea, and a panel votes on whether they're going to approve it or not. And you can get up to £5,000 to enact the idea. So that's kind of the approach we took, which sounds amazing until you actually go through this really long process of actually trying to implement the idea, which we went to the student union, but the student union wouldn't support us, because we weren't doing this for the society. We were doing this for all commuter students, so they wouldn't support us. And then I essentially got really lucky and was accepted on the reverse mentoring scheme at the university. And I was put with a really senior member of staff, and that person gave us like the access to the head of estates to find the space, you know, and to really like drive the idea forward. So we were super lucky. In terms of if you want to know what's inside the commuters lounge, there is the large social space that you can kind of see there. There's obviously desks around the outside, because it was like a computer room repurposed. But movie nights and lunch hour chat events are held in there now. There's a kitchen with fridge, microwave, boiling water and sink. So Students, if they're going to, say, an evening social event, they can just like buy a microwave meal and cook that or heat something up, rather than having to spend, say, £10–15 on a full meal. There's some lockers in there. So then people can now participate in the baking society or sports society. So they're not having to take the cake into the lecture theatre because nobody wants to do that. There's a small silent study room just for when like the libraries are totally rammed, which people probably get, you know, every time it's exam time. And also it's wheelchair accessible, and it's in quite an iconic place. So if anyone knows Leeds campus, it's the longest corridor in Europe or something, is the level 10. So these are just a few links. I'm happy to share my slides. I'm not 100% sure if people will be able to access the exact guide, but I've kind of, I might do some screenshots, maybe if people want a few more to see a little bit more of it. So yeah, so that guide was written by commuter students. It's got travel advice on there, so like a whole array of things. But in West Yorkshire, we have particular passes that are available to residents and depending on age. So there's things like that in there, obviously rail cards as well, things around making friends and getting jobs on campus. So when I did my dissertation, I found that the commuter students really loved having campus-based jobs because they made friends that way, and obviously it was really convenient for them. Just practical tips in general, and there's things around apps as well in there. So in terms of the commuters lounge, there's a video there of how to get to the commuters lounge, and the recent sort of university TikTok video was just amazing to see that a commuter student had been able to take over the TikTok and basically said, you know, I live in so-and-so, and this is my journey to campus, and this is what I get up to when I'm on campus, and just raising awareness. Just fantastic to see. So just a few ideas on how you might be able to support commuter students in your university is just understanding your context is really important, because as I've said, you know, the Leeds context, it's a Russell group, it's a campus feel, but it's just on the edge of the city centre. There's no parking for students unless, you know, you've got a blue badge. So the context is going to be so different for every university. Understanding what your commuter students want or need, raising awareness of their needs and advocating for them, because, you know, the students, they're doing like I was doing a part-time job, I was, you know, trying to study, and, you know, they're very time poor as students, and they need your support. So advocating for anything, and there's just a few ideas on there, like Emma's already said, around exams and the thing around hotels and timetabling. Think about using them as a lens in your work, because they're a highly intersectional group. So that could be, depends on whatever your job is, but like in the access and participation plans, in EDI, just in mental health support, for example. Think about how you might define them, or ask students to self-identify, and collecting data and analysing that to support their needs is a huge step forward if you're sort of along that journey. We've got a commuter student working group, which is comprised of both educational engagement staff and students, and I've been asked to join that, but it kind of it made a definition, and then it kind of fizzled out, but it's been yeah, it's coming back again, so that's going on. And then just, yeah, think about how the networks, space, information, awareness, those things are needed in relation to the challenges that your commuter students are experiencing. This is my last slide, so you might want to consider and think about the impact on the students, because from personal experience, it feels very much like I was overburdened. You know, I was doing all of this just off my own back. I wasn't getting paid to do any of this. So, you know, the students need support, they need the financial remuneration for taking on the work and recognition for doing the work. The structures in your organisation may not really help them, you know. So when I was coming up to the student union and I'm saying, I'm doing this, I've got the money, like, can you help me? Can you advocate? And they're like, no, because you're doing this for a group of students rather than a society, things like that. That even now at the University of Leeds, there's not really a sort of structure as such that would support commuter students. There's sort of just pockets and teams, and it's really hard as a student to navigate who those contacts are and where they are. So just reaching out to any commuter students you've got, and if they want to do things, I think from a student perspective is so helpful. So they often need those senior sponsors to help them achieve the things they want to do. Think about what students and staff are taking on the work. Obviously, there is also budgeting. And finally, I'm just questioning who actually is a commute student, because I believe there's flaws of having that universal definition. And think about, you know, what is a commute student in your university and context. I think that's everything. Yeah, that's everything.
Thanks, Susan. There was something about the definition, which I'll come back to. There was a very specific question about, was the room locked, your commuter lounge, was the room locked or accessible to all?
So it is accessible to everyone. We had a lot of chats around whether we should have a PIN code or like passes to swipe to get it open, but it is accessible to anyone. And it's kind of open during the sort of normal building hours, so like 8 till 6. Yeah.
Wonderful. Lynn, sorry, I don't know if you want to say your question.
Sorry, it's a very long question. It took me ages to type it. I'm very slow typer. I'd be really interested to know, that was a really great session, so thank you both. If the lounge is well used. I spoke to a couple of unis ahead of this session today and who said they had lounges and they were not finding that students were using them. And I know you said you'd done like how to find us video, etc. And the risk is, with space being a premium, that it's something that a uni will say, right, we'll do it, and then after a year close it again because they want the space back. So I hope I've rambled a bit there, sorry.
At first, I think it wasn't that well used. I think the more publicity, the more people who talked about it, it's I would say really well used now. Like I walked past and just sort of like glanced in the other day and I could see people in the kitchen and I was like, wow, this is great. I was going to say something else about the lounge. Let me just read what you've put. Yeah, we thought really hard about where to locate the lounge, in terms of it's located sort of on when students come into the University of Leeds campus, it's sort of one of the first buildings that they would either arrive at or leave via. So it's more towards the city centre, because we said we don't want it towards the sort of Hyde Park, which is where the residential students live. We need it towards the city centre so people can drop off their sports stuff and the cakes and whatever else, and then, you know, use that as a base then to go from there straight to the train station or the bus station. So where you locate it is really important. We were also really lucky to locate it in there. It is really not the nicest building, anyone who knows this building, but it's okay. But that team, that university, I think it was physics, they'd moved out into a swankier building. So because of that, plus the pandemic, I know you're saying office space, like, or spaces at a premium. It really wasn't in this sense, and they're trying to repurpose the whole building now. So we basically got really lucky, and I think pre the pandemic and pre that move, this would have been really difficult to try and implement.
Thank you.
I'm just going to jump in there, and just on the back of that, I think this is a really important question about, also, just because you have something, it doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't equate to use. And also students don't always know that it exists. And that I think there's also a portion of work, you can get something set up and that's brilliant. But then if students don't know about it, that can be the additional challenge. So this is not the same, but in one of my research, I knew that there was a commuter student contact at the institution because I'd spoken to them. And then I asked more generally one of my participants whether there was any commuter student support at the institution, and they said no. And I think that's really interesting because they didn't know about it. They obviously they didn't have an understanding, and they hadn't been communicated to them in a way. So I think that's really important. These are like separate pieces of work that can be really hard to not only just get something, but your work doesn't stop there. Unfortunately, it's about making sure students know about it as well.
Thanks, Emma. So a special point to Shelley, who did go and try and find the definition for her commuter students. And I know asked in there if anybody had one, and thank you to Sally. I know that she shared hers. I mean, I don't want to kind of pile on you, Lynn, but I was just thinking if people wanted to go via Lynn to kind of try and either share all of their definitions, and we can kind of see if there is something central that comes back. Lynn, you're normally the well-connected one in this circle.
No pressure, that's fine. Yeah, if people want to share stuff, that's great. We'll see what we find.
Perfect. Obviously, lots on there today. Obviously, I know that people have found this session very useful. Emma and Susan, really fantastic, really insightful on this topic, which I am very grateful for. Happy to take any questions. If not, hopefully, oh, there is a very long one there. Very nice. Our students have been asking for a microwave in their common space, which I think would be especially helpful for commuter students. One thing they've raised with safety of students having access to a microwave, and we did have a student try to microwave a metal tub. Okay. But it's causing an issue. But is there an issue when you're creating the commuters lounge? Anything in the policy about using equipment? I think that's quite a specific one, Susan, if you have any insight in that.
I don't think we had these issues really at Leeds, because in the LUU, the student union, there's already microwaves they can use dotted around the campus. There's microwaves that students can use. So it's not something that we have had issues with. Obviously, there's like fire alarms and stuff in case there ever was an issue on that one.
And I suppose there's I just suppose from my side, from a practical point of view, there are steps, like you say, trying to get the space is one thing, and then maybe, like you say, if that has a sink, and then maybe building up to microwaves. Like, I suppose everything doesn't need to be there at once. I know that quite a few people had commented that lockers were like a really great idea, so I suppose it's kind of trying those things out. And more and more things, I suppose, like you say, is about communication, whether that's a thing above a microwave, like what goes in and what goes out or not, and like kettles and everything like that. But I do appreciate that health and safety is one of those things. Okay. Again, Emma's putting there, I think commuter students will only increase. Exactly, Emma. And I think that was from Lynn and I's point of view, when we look at the sessions that might be useful for people, we know that commuter students had come up, and obviously we try our very best to get the experts like Emma and Susan in the room, really being able to talk about this. So one of the other things I would say is, just in general, if there are topics or things that are coming up for you that you would like the community to speak about, please always reach out to myself or to Lynn to really kind of say, is there anything on this, or could you do a session on something else? We're always really keen to hear that. So there was a question. Oh yeah, thank you. Thank you, Susan. Around the SU and the budgeting. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Susan, but Susan's thing about the SU not supporting it was because it wasn't a society.
Yeah.
And that was really the main. So there was obviously very clear rules about being what they can support and what they couldn't support.
Yeah, it wasn't anything to do with students being taken away from the student union building. It's in a completely sort of separate part of the campus anyway. The student union building is very central, whereas this one is much more towards the city centre. So it's basically just another space, and like the 4 microwaves they have in the LUU are clearly not enough for lots of hungry mouths. So yeah.
I don't know if you want to, I do know as well, thank you, Susan, that you responded to the question about the discounts for students. I don't know if there's any more to add than kind of your comment and maybe what you did to lobby kind of to get the successful outcome.
I mean, in terms of the question around like the B network, which is the new sort of like bus network in Manchester. This is nothing that I've done. This is sort of, it had happened quite a while ago, and I think what the process was, some students would have passed a policy with our student union, which then meant that the executive of the student union then lobbied the local bus company, which is First West Yorkshire, that are the ones that go past the university. So I think it started as £1, like it was a £1 single, and it's gradually crept up a little bit, but I think it's like £1.30 maybe. And you can also buy these tickets on the app as well. So that's kind of what's happening. But I think that's something that Salford and Manchester universities really should explore, because obviously there's a new opportunity there with the B network that's come in.
Thank you. Thank you, Rosie, for popping the link in there to everybody that doesn't or isn't already signed up to our newsletter. We will share things from this session via the newsletter as we usually do. So if you aren't already, please sign up. Hopefully everyone will join me in thanking either visually on the screen, via an emoji, via the comments, for Emma and Susan for giving us wonderful insights, giving us their time, and really obviously helping both university staff and obviously all of the students that are kind of needing support. So there we go. Yes, lots of comments. So thank you all. We have our very last session within the Autumn Staff Training webinar series, which is on the 12th of December, and we'll be joined by Pete Quinn and a number of students. So if you're not already signed up, please join us. I will leave it there. Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you, Emma. It's been fabulous. Thank you for everybody for your time, as always, on a Tuesday, and I hope that the rest of your day goes well. Thank you, and take care.